Welcome everyone. Good evening. So this is the second session of this free program for of introduction to the RMP PMI-RMP certification. And as we have announced last week in the first session, we wanted to share with you in this second session actually the exact risk management content which we share with our PMP participants in the PMP exam preparation course. And the reason for that, why did we want to share this, is because actually a few of our PMP students who took the RMP exam told us that actually the content which we study in the PMP course for risk management actually is quite good. It could cover like up to 60% of what they saw in the RMP certification. So you know what we want, we told ourselves, okay, let's share this content with our viewers, okay, and we think it's going to help you. And then in the next session, in the last session, session 3, we will do many practice questions from the RMP certification, like related to the RMP certification. And I personally also think that the content which we see in the PMP course is quite good. Actually, it can help you a lot. It contains, I think, a lot of the techniques which you will see in the RMP exam. Now, in session 1, we did a brief introduction to the RMP certification. We explained the prerequisites, we explained the ECO and also the risk management guide. A little bit of it, we saw the table of content. And in today's session, we will see, how to prepare a risk management plan, how to identify risks, what are the risk types, how to identify risks, how to use the risk register, how to analyze risks qualitatively and quantitatively, and also, how to prepare risk responses and follow up on those response plans. Okay, so stay tuned, guys. Actually, this is going to be a session. We're going to have a 10-minute break in the middle of the session. We will not stop recording. Even the break will be recorded. Then we will cut it off when we will upload the video to YouTube. Okay, all right. So let's start, guys. All right. So okay, I don't need to go through those. Okay, first of all, so you, as a project manager or as somebody practicing risk management, actually, okay, and that's mainly in projects. So for PMI, this risk management professional certification is addressed to people who are taking care of risks, managing risks in projects, portfolios, and programs, as we have mentioned actually in the first session. So you definitely need to create a risk management plan. Okay, this risk management plan is actually quite standard. It could be used on projects, on portfolios, on programs, because definitely the first step you need to do for managing your risks is to prepare a plan on how you're going to manage your risks. And this risk management plan, you will explain which tools and techniques you will use, how are you going to measure the probability, how are you going to determine the impact, what is the threshold, you need to define the threshold in your risk management plan, what is your risk matrix, which we will see in a little while. Okay, how are you going to qualitatively analyze your risks, which tools or which techniques will you apply, who will be doing what in terms of risk management, how are you going to quantitatively analyze your risks, which techniques or which tools are you going to use, which templates for recording the risks are you going to use, where are you going to store it, and then the roles and responsibilities, in regards to risks. When are you supposed to escalate? You need to understand, what are your boundaries, your limits from the steering committee. When can you handle a risk on your own with your team? When should you escalate it? All of that needs to be defined, in your risk management plan. Okay, so those are general practices. Okay, because once a risk is identified, whether it's a project-related risk or a program-related risk or a portfolio-related risk, the practices are kind of similar. Okay, of course, maybe not the same stakeholders, maybe not the same impact or size of the risk, but still, once you know how to manage risks on a project, you definitely will know how to manage risks on bigger, more scalable level. Okay. And of course, if you're in a risk, if you're in a program, and once you have a risk that would impact the entire program, then you need to understand, the same thing, like where does that risk come from? How will it impact the entire program? Does it impact some particular projects? Okay. Or will it affect the entire program? And then you need to determine the impact on the entire program, etc. And the same you do it for portfolios. Okay. So again, once you manage or you master risk management on a project level, then you can go ahead and do it on higher or bigger levels. Okay. Then you go ahead and you start identifying your project risks. And of course, for risk identification, we're going to talk a little bit about it, because one of the struggles project managers face is that it's like not always their teams are identifying risks voluntarily. Okay. So oftentimes we project managers, we struggle with convincing our team members that convincing them of, trying to help us with identifying mainly technical risks, sometimes business related risks, sometimes internal risks, sometimes commercial risks or managerial risks or operational risks. Because I personally, as a project manager, I noticed that when a team member identifies a risk, and I think they are the best person to watch after this risk, they regret doing that. They say, oh, you know what, I have my technical work, why would you assign me onto this risk and watching after this risk? And actually the reason we assign them to that particular risk is because they have identified it. That means they know the root cause, or no, not the root cause, actually the origin, the trigger, where that risk comes from. So we need to explain to them many times that just because they are the best person to watch after the risk, it's not because they identified the risk that means they have to manage the risk, okay, or watch after the risk. Actually, it's just most of the time is because of the qualification, all right, because they're the most qualified to do it. And then in the project management, in the risk management plan, then of course you move on to qualitatively analyzing risks. We will see an overview of this later, and different techniques. And then once you have prioritized the risks, then you can move on with quantitatively analyzing risks. Why don't we quantitatively analyze all the risks? That's because quantitative analysis sometimes takes some time because of some researchers, because of involving experts to be able to determine really what's the exact potential impact. How can we know that we have really calculated the impact in a right way, etc. So actually, only prioritize risks which have actually exceeded the threshold. Usually they go for advanced analysis, okay, such as the quantitative analysis. And we saw last session, and the session one, we saw actually in the risk management guide and the ECO few techniques which were mentioned for qualitative and quantitative analysis. We will see some of them in this session today, and of course the rest of the techniques, they are part of the full RMP course. Okay. Then you need to go and plan for your risk responses. You do this, of course, with your experts or with your team. You need to make sure that those plans are really applied, okay? Because one of the struggles we face in a project, especially with management, with the steering committee, is there is always this question from, let's say, from the steering committee or from the management. They say this. We know that a risk is a potential event. It could happen, and maybe it would not happen. Now, we know that those risks have a high score, which means high probability, high impact, okay, or potential impact. And yeah, you project manager, you're recommending, to take action towards those risks. But and those actions will cost us a lot of money. But what if that risk wouldn't materialize, wouldn't happen? Wouldn't we just lose money by those by implementing those actions? Why don't we wait a little longer? And that's always that question, that question that creates a big discussion. And we project managers, often we need to convince them and explain to them that that's how it's described in the governance, and the governance of the project, the part related to risk management. And the project governance is written: if a risk score is higher than the threshold, then we need to put an action plan, whether it's a mitigation plan or any sort of other response plans, and we need to implement that plan. Okay, whether the risk materializes or not, it's better to take precaution, okay, preventive actions or some action plan, rather than to just sit and wait and see the risk actually happening. And then if it turns or it becomes an issue, or let's say a blocking issue or a severe issue, then only then we will regret not having those actions deployed earlier. Okay, so really that's always a sort of a conflict on when to deploy the action plan for the risk. And we will see that in a while in some of those terminologies. Now, once we have implemented the response plan, and in order to implement the response plan, we definitely need to assign a risk owner. A risk owner is the person that is the most qualified to watch after this risk, ensure the implementation of the plan is happening, is actually following up on the risk, continuously calculating if there are any changes in the probability or the impact levels of that risk, etc. Okay, and that person should be able also to report during the risk management meeting, which takes place maybe once in a week, or during the project status meeting, together with the project manager and the project team. Okay, and then always as part of the risk management plan is to monitor your project risks, and that's what we have just mentioned. So basically, these are the steps in the risk management. Okay, which once you know how to apply them, then you can apply them on project level, program level, or portfolio level. And of course, we're just having a briefing here. We're not going to really deep details. Okay, all right. Then, in your risk management, you can plan. You can also define, your risk breakdown structure. You can, define what categories, or in which categories will you put your risks. For example, you decide to put your risks, or categorize them as technical risks, maybe commercial risks, organizational risks, maybe internal risks or external risks, etc. Okay, so for example, we say for technical risks, we're talking here about anything related to technology requirements, maybe environments, like technical environments, quality, performance, reliability, etc. So any risks falling under these categories, those are part of the technical risks. For example, external risks, we're talking about anything regarding dealing with subcontractors, suppliers, vendors, regulations, market, customer, weather, etc. Anything coming from the outside. For organizational risks, we're talking here about, for example, internal resources, maybe funding risks, some internal dependencies, etc. And for example, managerial risks, we're talking about risks related to estimating, for example, or planning, communication, execution, etc. Okay, so you as a project manager, you create or you prepare an RBS, a risk breakdown structure, and you put as part of your risk management plan. So then it will be easier to track the risks, by category. Okay. Also, as part of your risk management plan is quite important to prepare a probability and impact matrix. Okay, so what's a probability and impact matrix? Um, for example, you need or you will define a few levels of probability. Now, here in this example, we have defined 5 levels of probability. Okay, where rare probability, something like probably would never happen, an unlikely probability, something that we do not expect it to happen, something, a possible probability, something that might happen, a likely probability, something which will probably happen, and very likely, which is something it will happen almost undoubtedly, okay? Almost 99%, okay? Of course, we can never have 100% as probability, but 99% is called this way. So, for example, we decided to go with 5 levels of probability. You can choose 3 levels, 7 levels, 4, it's up to you, really, okay? That's just an example. And then you define the impact levels. So, for example, trivial, that's almost nothing, like none, minor, moderate, major, and critical impact levels. So here we have defined, for example, just in this example, okay, 5 impact levels, 5 probability levels, and then, we have created a matrix out of these 5 levels on each side. Okay, so for a rare probability event with a trivial impact, we're talking about a very low risk, almost not a risk, to be honest. Okay, for a rare probability and a minor impact, we're talking about a low risk. For a rare probability and a moderate impact, we're talking again with about a low risk. However, a rare probability with major impact, that's a medium risk. Rare probability with a critical impact, that's another medium risk. Okay, so unlikely probability with trivial, that's low. Unlikely probability with minor, that's low. But unlikely probability with moderate, then that's medium. Unlikely probability with major impact, that's medium. And unlikely probability with critical impact, that's again medium. Okay. However, if the probability is possible and the impact is minor, then we're talking about a medium risk. The same, possible probability with moderate impact, that's medium. Possible probability with major impact, that's medium. However, possible probability of happening with critical impact, then we're talking about a high risk. Okay. Likely probability with trivial impact, then we're talking about medium. The same for likely probability and minor impact. The same for likely probability and moderate. Okay, but likely probability with major impact, that's high, and likely probability with critical, that's also high, or maybe very high. Okay, maybe. All right. Very likely probability with trivial impact, that's medium. The same for very likely with minor impact, but very likely probability with moderate, that's high. But very likely probability with major, that's high or very high, and the same for very likely probability with critical, that's extreme maybe. But since here we defined only 3 levels of risks, then we have low, medium, high. Now, in risk management, now once you have defined this matrix, then you will go ahead after that and those identified risks which you have in your risk register, you will definitely analyze their probability of happening with the level of potential impact. And once you have known the let's say the level of your risks, then you will start with focusing on your high risks. Okay, you start with the highest ones, like the ones that are very likely to happen with a critical impact, and then the next ones and the next ones, and you focus on them. All right, and once you're done with them, then you go ahead and you check on your medium risks. And even though I want to tell you guys something really important. When you're dealing with the risks, okay, um, when you're dealing with risks, and you start with focusing on those high risks, don't just be dragged by the response plan of the risks, and you just focus on them and you forget about the other risks. actually you need to check on your other risks every now and then. Like as a project manager, I do that like once in a week, okay? Because maybe one of your medium risks or maybe one of your low risks could turn into high risk, because risks could change probability of happening at any time. Once you have assessed the impact, changing the evaluation or the assessment of the potential impact maybe is not as often as the probability, but the probability of risks, that's something that could change at any moment. So you as a project manager or as a risk practitioner, you need to make sure that you follow with your project risks probability or your risks probability, so often, let's say regularly, okay? So don't forget about your medium risks or about your low risks, and you get dragged by your high risks, and then you forget about the others. So please don't do that mistake, okay? It's quite an important advice, okay? All right. Now we can start with some terminology. Okay, so first of all, when we're talking about uncertainty and risks, okay, we can talk about volatile events. What are volatile events? Those are events that keep changing, their probability so frequently and in an unpredictable way. One day they're on that level, the next day they are on different level. A volatile event is an event that keeps changing. One day it's really close, from the project. The next day is further out or further away. So that's called a volatile event. The opposite of that is predictability. Okay, so predictability, that's an event which is predictable. Actually, it's constant, doesn't change that often. But a volatile event is actually an event that keeps changing a lot. Okay, in terms of probability of happening, for example. An uncertainty, that's about being unclear about something in the present or in the future, not being able to understand something, okay? So if we're talking about an event, we say, or for example, a stakeholder, we say the behaviors of this stakeholder is uncertain. Uncertain because we cannot, understand their behavior. We cannot, be able really to follow with them closely, etc. So that's what uncertainty is about, which is being unable to understand clearly certain events or certain circumstances. A complex situation or a complex event, that's when multiple interconnected factors actually are present in that event. Okay, so those interconnected factors, they create a complexity. Okay, the opposite of complexity is simplicity. That's when an event is actually quite simple, quite clear. Yeah, not many factors connected to it. Ambiguity is having a lack of clarity about an event. Okay, so something ambiguous, something is unclear. Okay, so the opposite of ambiguity is clarity. Okay, so these are basic terminologies in risk management. Okay, and each terminology is used to describe a particular situation. For example, when we're talking about Bitcoin, okay, as a cryptocurrency, so Bitcoin is really very volatile, okay. One day it's worth this amount of money against dollar. The next day or sometimes the next month is actually way higher or way lower. So actually, the exchange rate of Bitcoin is not stable and is very unpredictable. Okay, so that's, for example, what makes it volatile. All right. Um, when we're talking about uncertainty, we talk usually about an uncertainty in the human behavior, such as, for example, we're uncertain about the stakeholder because they could change their preferences or behaviors. We could talk about the process uncertainty because, for example, the process is not quite understandable. Due to the lack of understanding the process or how the process flows, then we're talking about a process uncertainty. Okay, we can also talk about a task uncertainty. Okay, because we have doubts with the task, the instructions are not clear or are not understood. Then we're talking about a task uncertainty. When we start a project, usually the cone of uncertainty is much higher at the beginning of the project, because a lot of because we're missing understanding in a lot of areas of the project, such as we don't know the stakeholders enough, we don't understand the technology very well, we're not quite sure about the requirements and the expectations. So actually the cone of uncertainty is quite high from the beginning, but the more we go into the project, the more time we spend with the stakeholders, on the technology, and the environment, on the project, then the more we understand and things become clearer. Okay, and therefore the cone of uncertainty actually is decreasing. Okay, and once we reach the end of the project, we're not supposed to have anything unclear anymore. Okay, or uncertain anymore. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so for complexity, I think it's quite clear. All right. And for ambiguity, we could have maybe sometimes some conceptual ambiguity or some situational ambiguity. Conceptual ambiguity, that's when we're talking about having a lack of effective understanding. Okay. This could occur when people, they could use they could use similar terms, terminologies, but in different ways. Okay, that then creates a conceptual ambiguity. A situational ambiguity, that's when we're exercising certain tasks or certain actions, but each time we're having a different outcome. Okay, so having multiple options to solve a problem is a form of situational ambiguity. Okay, so those just some examples to clarify a little bit these terminologies. However, there are other terms which are quite important, and actually our the people in our PMP course, they often get a question about these terminologies. And maybe you guys, if you're taking your RMP course, maybe you will have also a question about these terminologies. Okay. For example, when we're talking about a risk urgency, what do we mean by that? Now, a risk urgency, here we're talking about how quickly should we implement a risk response in order to be effective. Okay, so how urgent is it to implement that particular risk response? And this probably responds to the question which we had earlier, that situation which we described earlier, which we project managers face often in our work when we identify a particular risk, and now we recommend, or we prepare a response plan, but then management challenge us regarding how urgent is it to implement the risk response, because implementing a risk response will cause a significant amount of money, and since the risk is an uncertain event, which could happen and it might not, then sometimes they would like to wait, and here when the management asked to wait, that's like we're just trying to see how proximate is the risk. So there is about the risk urgency, there is the risk proximity. I'll skip the second one, I go back to it later. For risk proximity, that's when we are assessing how much time is left, okay, before the risk can impact one project objective, or the project as a whole. Okay, so how proximate is the risk, how close is it? All right, that's assessing the amount of time before it can impact. Okay, risk dormancy, that's when the risk occurs and we wait and try to see what was the impact of the risk. So the risk dormancy is about assessing how long after a risk has occurred before we could discover its impact. Okay, that's a risk dormancy. For risk connectivity, that's checking whether that particular risk is actually an individual project risk, or it is or is it connected to other project risks. Okay, so is it a solo risk or a connected risk with other risks. Okay, so these terminologies are quite important, and they probably describe the different situations we could have in a project or a program related to risks. Okay. All right. So actually, as I said, this part we're seeing today is taking straight from the PMP course. So actually, even the questions here are exactly as we. I mean, I haven't changed the word. I haven't changed the page, and the content. Actually, I just opened this presentation from the PMP course. You can see we are on slide 699. And I wanted to share this risk management chapter because, as I told you, many of our course participants told us that this part has helped them quite well with their RMP certification. Okay, so let's try this question. So during the risk identification process, a project manager and their team identified an event. However, they were not able to properly evaluate this event in order to identify its threats or opportunities. Such event is called what? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, or ambiguity. Okay. Now, they could not properly evaluate, so they probably could not understand it really well. So here we're not talking about volatility. We're not talking about something that is changing quickly. It's not complexity. We're not talking about something that is connected or actually that has got many interconnected factors. And we're not talking about ambiguity. Actually, here we're talking about uncertainty, like which is the lack of understanding a certain event, and that's why they could not properly evaluate this event. Okay, all right. Here is a drag and drop question. And actually, a lot of our participants told us that in the exam they got this exact question, or actually maybe one that is very similar to it. Okay, so link the goals with the risk parameters. Assess the amount of time before the risk can impact one or more project objectives. Assess if the risk is related to other individual project risks. Assess how quickly the risk response needs to be implemented in order to be effective. Assess how long after a risk has occurred before its impact is discovered. Which one is dormancy, which one is urgency, which one is connectivity, and which one is proximity. Now, many times I tell my course participants in a drag and drop question, try to search in each scenario for a keyword, okay, which would link you with the right answer, okay? So here in answer A, we're talking about how much time before the risk can impact, okay? So we're talking about proximity in here, okay? So let me show you the answers, okay? The second scenario is about relationship. Is it related or not? So here we're talking about connectivity. The third scenario is, third description actually, is how quickly to implement a risk response. So here we're talking about urgency. How quickly? Here we're talking about the urgency. So the last one is how long after it occurred we could discover the impact. So here we're talking about dormancy. Okay, so these are the correct answers for this question, which is a drag and drop question. I have also recorded this question in one of my previous videos about drag and drop questions in the PMP exam. And we know that these terminologies are actually also present in the RMP exam. Okay. Now, what's the difference between an individual risk and an overall project risk? Okay, an individual risk is usually a single possible event which might affect the outcome of the project. Uh, an overall project risk actually is the possibility of any or more circumstances occurring and impacting the project as a whole. Okay, so that's the difference between an individual project risk and an overall project risk. Okay. Now, other quite important terminologies which we saw last week in the ECO and in the risk guide. We're talking here about inherent risks, residual risks, and secondary risks. Okay. Inherent risks, these are risks which exist due to the absence of any risk management process, a control mechanism, or any interventions. So when we're not managing our project risks or program risks properly, then we're talking about inherent risks. Once we apply the risk management process or we apply control on these risks, which means we try to mitigate them by applying some risk responses, then definitely as an output of the risk controls, we can have three possible outcomes. Let's say outcomes, maybe. Okay. Yeah, sorry, outcomes, not output, outcomes. So once we apply risk controls, we can have three possible outcomes. We can have mitigated risks. Okay, so the response plan was effective. The risk was mitigated. Either we eliminated the, either we reduced the probability of occurrence, or we reduce the potential impact, or maybe we have eliminated the source of the risk, or we can have some residual risks. And the residual risks are quite important, and actually we'll have several questions on the RMP exam about residual risks. Residual risks, these are risks that remain even after the controls have been applied. So they remain, they're residual, they don't go away, okay? They stay there. Yeah, and this happens a lot in our projects, okay? So usually these risks, we have to, let's say it in a simple way. We have to live with them, okay? Of course, we will take, we will always put aside a contingency reserve in case they happen, okay? But we cannot eliminate them, okay? Even if we tried, with several action plans, those risks remain in there. So that's why they're called residual risks. And sometimes out of response plans on risks, we can have secondary risks. Once we implement a response plan on a main risk, okay, that response plan will create a secondary risk as a direct outcome of a risk response. Okay, and those secondary risks we will record them in the risk register, and then follow the process by evaluating them or analyzing them, and then if they are high risks, then we can implement some response plans. So secondary risks, those are like new risks, but they come from the risk controls directly, okay, and not from the identification process. Okay, so these are three terminologies we wanted you to know, guys: inherent risks, residual risks, and secondary risks. Okay, so we add that to all those risk types and terminologies which we have just seen. All right. What is really important is also to understand, or what is also important is to understand the difference between a risk and an issue, because many times people confuse between risks and issues. And in the RMP exam, you will have a few questions about describing issues, because PMI wants to make sure that you really understand the difference between them. So, what's the difference between a risk and an issue? We said earlier that a risk is a potential event, a probable event, which may occur or may not occur. Okay, it may or may not occur. All right. A risk can be positive, which is called opportunity, because opportunity actually is something that didn't happen yet, but is actually bringing positive impact. Or a risk can be negative. Negative risk is an event that might have some negative impact on the project or the team or the program. Okay, so risks can be positive or negative, even though many people say that they were used in their when they talk or when they do business, they're used to mention the word risk to refer to an event which could have some potential negative impact. But actually, an event with a probable negative impact, that's called a threat, and an event with a probable positive impact, that's called an opportunity. A risk is documented in the risk register, which we will see in a while. Okay. And usually risks are treated through a prevention or preventive action or mitigation action if you're talking about threat, or various other actions if you're talking about opportunities. However, an issue is quite different, than the risk. An issue is a problem, is an event that has already happened, took place. An issue is always negative, okay? And it is documented in the issue log. In order to handle issues, corrective action or issues are treated through corrective actions, or it's called maybe sometimes workaround or pivot, okay? Usually that requires a change request. And, before taking any action, we need to, also analyze the root cause of the issue, okay? For example, having delays on a project or cost of overruns. If we have cost overruns, we definitely, before taking any action, we need to understand what's the root cause of those overruns, okay? Analyze them and then decide, for an action. And often we need to raise a change request, because those actions will cost us resources, time, cost, etc. Okay, examples of issues like having scope creep, some technological failures, a conflict in a team, a conflict with a vendor, with a stakeholder, or for example, deliverables not being accepted, the project deliverables not being accepted, some compliance issues, or etc. Okay, so always when there is an issue, start with the root cause analysis, then define an action plan, raise a change request, and then once it is approved, then implement that change request. Okay, all right. A risk has remained even after you implement all of your risk response strategies. What kind of risk is this, and what should you do about it? It's a secondary risk. You should add it to the watch list and revisit it periodically. It's a residual risk. You need to eliminate it by eliminating its root cause. It's a residual risk. You need to add a contingency reserve for it. It's a top risk. You should try to reduce its probability or impact. So actually here, guys, it's the key word we have here is risk has remained. So we're talking about a remaining risk. Okay. So it definitely is not gonna be a secondary risk and it's not a top risk. Okay. So A and D are out as answers. Now we have B, it says residual risk. We need to eliminate it by eliminating its root cause. However, it's not really possible sometimes to eliminate a residual risk, because if it was possible to eliminate it, then it wouldn't have been residual or categorized as residual. So therefore the right answer is C. It is a residual risk, so we need to add a contingency reserve for it. Okay, because a residual risk, it remains, you cannot eliminate it. I mean not easily. Okay. Now, in order for an event to categorize or to be categorized as a risk, that particular event needs to have a trigger condition. Okay, so for example, this lady in the photo here, she was fine. She was not in any risky situation. However, the moment she decided to take down this road, which leads to a forest with dangerous creatures, then she triggered a condition. Okay, so she kicked off a risk, or she triggered a risk, and now she's at risk, or her life is at risk. So a risk is always, coming, or always having a triggering condition. Okay. Um, we don't say, for example, oh, we have a risk of canceling the project. Why? Why do we have that risk of canceling the project? It's because the sponsor is sick, is very sick. I mean, like seriously sick. Okay. And without this sponsor, we cannot have this project because it's actually this sponsor who requested this project. So here, yes, we have a trigger. This project might be canceled because the sponsor is seriously sick. So here, yeah, we have a triggering condition. But if our sponsor is healthy and fine, so do our senior managers and the rest of the executive staff. So we cannot say, oh, the project is at risk of being canceled. Why? What's the triggering condition? We don't have any. So why would you put it as a risk? We should not. Okay. So we would put this cancellation or this potential probable cancellation of the project only if we have a serious or a trigger. Okay, let's say a trigger, which is, for example, the serious illness of the sponsor. Okay. Continuing with some other risk types, and these particularly related to projects. So there are what we call the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. Known unknowns, these are identified risks. Okay. So known because they are identified, and unknown because we don't know if they will happen or not. Okay. So these known unknowns, these identified risks, they are treated through a contingency reserve. So we put a contingency reserve, which we will see later. We will see how to calculate it. Okay. And they're treated through contingency reserve. So once, in case they happen, then or we create an action plan for them, and in case they happen, then we have a contingency reserve, to spend and cover for any potential impact. Unknown unknowns, those are unidentified risks. So they are unknown because they are unidentified, and they are the second unknown because we don't know if they will happen or not. So usually these are events which are impossible to find or identify in advance, because usually they are triggered by some unexperienced situations, which sometimes we call force majeure or act of God, such as natural disasters or some civil unrest or some pandemic, etc. Therefore, they're not part of the risk management plan, which means they have not been identified. And usually, these unknown risks or unidentified risks, they're handled and treated through the management reserve, which we will see in a second. Okay. All right. So what's the contingency reserve? The contingency reserve, it's used to cover for the known unknowns. Usually, is an output of the advanced quantitative analysis, and we will see how to do it. But also, it could be a fixed percentage of the cost baseline. Okay, it can be also a fixed amount. Okay, and in case the contingency reserve or the amount and the contingency reserve needs to be changed, usually it changes through a change request. Okay, and we will explain to you later why. Okay, a management reserve. Sorry, let's go back. A management reserve. This is used to cover, the unknown risks, the unidentified risks. Okay, for any unforeseen work that is within the scope of the project, in order to apply a workaround or a pivot when they happen. Okay, so that's what the management reserve is for. Now, in this PMP presentation, if we go back to no, not here. If we go back to page 70 something, yeah, this one 73. So actually, this page 73 from the PIN box 7, it will show you how the project budget is being calculated. So you can see here that once we have the estimates for the identified project work, which is the project baseline, the cost baseline, sorry, the cost baseline. Then we can add to that the contingency reserve, okay? And that would give us the project budget. And on top of that, there is this management reserve, which is usually a percentage from the budget. So, for example, I used to work for a company which has, a percentage, 5% as a percentage from the project budget to be kept in a management reserve. Of course, as a project manager, I don't use that management reserve. I don't control it. I know it is there. It's on top of the project budget, but I can ask for it and I can use it in case any unknown risk or unidentified risk materializes. Okay. So that's the management reserve. Okay. So if we go back to our risk management part, okay, right here. No, actually, yeah, here it is. All right. So we were right here. Okay. So that's what management reserve is. So as I said, I used to work for a company which has always had this rule of 5% of the project budget goes for management reserve. Or on yeah, the management reserve is 5% of the project budget. Okay, on top of the budget, of course, not taken out of the budget, but on top of the budget, because it's called management reserve for any unforeseen risks if they happen. Let's have a couple of questions. An agile team is using Scrum. A previously unidentified risk has occurred and threatens the current release. What should the project manager do? Stop project work until the risk is assessed and analyzed. Bring the issue up during the next stand-up meeting. Engage the team to facilitate a workaround or collaborate with stakeholders and the team to develop a risk response. Now, of course, this was an identified risk. It has occurred. So definitely what we need to do here is to engage the team in facilitating a workaround, okay? One of the project team's key members leaves the project for personal reasons. The project manager did not plan for such a scenario, but they managed to get a replacement with the help of a staffing agency. However, they have to pay them a higher salary, like pay this new recruit a higher salary because a key member left, so we have a new person to replace them, but we will pay them higher. This will result in an extra cost which falls under the project's what? Contingency reserve, cost baseline, management reserve, or budget. Since this was an unforeseen situation, and it happened, so we needed to cover for it through the management reserve, okay? Because it was unidentified, it was not identified previously, okay? All right, let's have one more question. An agile project is starting its seventh out of 8 iterations. In a planning meeting, the team realizes that an unidentified risk became an issue and the management reserve has to be used. What should the project manager do? Ask the sponsor to approve inclusion of an additional iteration to the project. Ask the team to include the contingency plan in the iteration backlog. Help the team review the project approach to initiate the corrective action, or ask the sponsor for money to implement the contingency plan. Now, of course, we cannot add an additional iteration to the project, neither ask for more money from the sponsor, because in PMI's mindset, we should not really always go for the easier solution, which is, oh, let's have more money, let's ask for more funds, or let's add more resources. PMI actually doesn't appreciate this kind of mindset, okay? PMI prefers if there will be an effective solution that is being implemented by the project manager and the entire project team. So therefore, the right answer here is answer C, which is help the team review the approach and initiate a corrective action. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to some risk analysis. Okay. Um, Now here, let's start with the qualitative risk analysis. Okay. What does qualitative risk analysis mean? It means assessing the probability and the potential impact of a risk, making sure that we're relying on some reliable data, uh, understand whether we're talking about a positive risk, an opportunity, or a negative risk, a threat, and also be able to prioritize risks. Okay. Now, I will show you a very basic template we're using. At least we're sharing with our PMP exam preparation course participants. Okay. And this basic template, it's really a good starting point. So we go to templates. When you go here to risk register, yeah. All right. So this is a very basic risk template or risk register actually. So in this risk register, which you as a project manager can use on a project level, on a program level. Of course, on a program level, it's a little more complex because then you need to check whether it's an overall program risk or it's an individual project risk, okay? Or a risk related to a particular project, okay? Part of your program. And the same goes for portfolios, okay? So here, um, we have this risk ID, then the risk category, which is coming from the risk breakdown structure. If it's an external risk, organizational risk, management risk, for example, technical risk, etc. Okay. Um, Here you put the risk description. So, for example, production could stop, and then the triggering condition. Why production could stop? It's due to the probable bankruptcy of our main supplier. Okay, we call it ABC. Is this a threat or an opportunity? Yes, definitely a threat. Now, let's assess the probability. So this is a threat, not an opportunity. Now here, let's assess the probability of this risk, okay? So first of all, we need to understand that the probability is never 0% and is never 100%, okay? Never 0% because um, that's like, it's not a risk. If it's 0%, it's not a risk anymore. And probability is not 100% because then we're not talking about risk anymore. Because 100% probability, that contradicts the basic definition of a risk, which is a probable event which could occur and may not occur. Okay, so that's why we don't really take 100%. Okay, so let's suppose here for a low risk, a low risk is when the probability is from 1 to 33%, medium is 34 to 66%, and high is 67 to 99%. Okay. Now, how would we calculate those percentages? Now, there are a few ways. Either you rely on an expert opinion, or you check on historic data. For example, let's say we analyze the last 10 projects, 10 similar projects, and we notice that the last 10 similar projects, this actually risk has happened in seven of them. So if it happened in seven of them, then we're talking about 70%, 70% probability of occurrence. So therefore, probability is high. Okay. Or we can, rely on observation, or we can, make some mathematical calculation. And with our PMP training participants, we share some exercise, which is quite useful to, help them calculate the probability in a mathematical way, based on the data in that particular exercise. Okay. Um, for the impact, again, let's say we have defined three levels. Low, where when the impact is from 1 to 33%. Now, you might be wondering, how can we use percentage in impact? What percentage are we talking about? Well, it could be an impact on timeline, on budget, on deliverables acceptance, on team performance. It's not quite usual, okay, but we could in our projects, actually we could translate the impact into percentage, like impact on timeline, on budget, team performance, etc. Because also we came up with an effective way called the risk score. which is percentage of probability times percentage of impact, and and then we check the score. We have put here as an example a threshold of 0.3. This is just an example, okay, which is included in the risk management plan, and therefore, in case a risk score is higher than the threshold, then definitely we need to take an action, put a mitigation plan or a contingency plan. But if the risk score is less than 0.3, which is just an example, okay, 0.3 is just an example, okay, then we don't take any action. Actually, we just monitor the risk, okay. Now, of course, if the risk is higher than the threshold, then we need to set a response plan, and this we will see it in the next section, okay. So this is the risk register. Actually, the last three columns are risk plan, risk owner, and the status, and that we will talk about it later, okay. So always for a risk, we need to take a proactive action. Yeah, exactly. Some mostly preventive actions, but when we talk about an issue, then we're talking about a reactive action generally. So just in terms of terminology, so you know how to or what to say exactly. How often do we update this risk register? Personally, as a project manager in all my projects, I update the risk register every day. Like when I say update, I mean I check. I check my risk register every day. Okay, so every day I make sure that for, the response plan being implemented. I follow with my team or with the experts responsible for implementing the response plans. I check if there are any changes related to the risk probability or risk impact, etc. Okay, so really, I do this as a project manager. Okay, that really had saved me in many projects. Okay, so if we go back to the qualitative risk analysis, so here we're going to see some few techniques which you will have in your RMP certification. So here we're talking, for example, about the what if scenario analysis. What if scenario, that's assessing different scenarios, try to predict their outcome. And what if the technique is about asking what if, like a series of what if questions, such as what if we do this, what would happen? What if we choose this solution? What would happen? What if we decide to go with this vendor? What would happen? What if I reply to the customer in this way? What would happen? So that's like the what if scenario, right? And this would allow to, imagine or figure out different probable and possible scenarios, and also prepare a contingency or response plan to them. Okay. So usually the what if scenario that, that is used by cautious people or people who are not risk takers generally. Okay. So this is the what if scenario. There is the alternative analysis, that's studying and comparing different possible options for responding to a particular risk. And for each alternative, we will identify the pros and cons, okay? Uh, and then evaluate the alternatives and choose the one that best fits us, okay, or fits the project. Okay, that's an alternative analysis. There is also this decision tree analysis. Okay, so the decision tree analysis is used when actually we need to choose. For example, here in this example, we need to purchase a machine. Okay, uh, and we need to decide which contractor to choose. Uh, we have two available contractors. One low bidding contractor with a bid of 100,000 K, sorry, 100,000. But this contractor is quite risky. Why? Because when we studied their previous projects, we noticed that they delivered only 50% of their projects were delivered on time, and the other 50% actually they were delayed with an average delay of 2 months. Okay, and for us, each month of delay costs us 20,000. So 2 months delay, that would probably cost us around 40,000. There is another contractor available. They are reliable, okay, but they're expensive. Their bid was about 150,000. Okay, they are reliable because based on their previous projects, 80% of their projects were completed on time, and only 20% were delayed, and the average delay was about 1 month. Okay, so here actually we have two possible contractors, each contractor with two possible paths. Okay, so what we need to do is to calculate the value of each path. Well, let's start with the low bidder. Okay. Now, this low bidder, in case they will be delayed with a 2 month delay, as happened in 50% of the previous projects, then this path will cost us 140,000, which is 100,000 for the machine plus our loss of 40,000 for those 2 months delay. Okay. However, if we get lucky and they deliver, and we are one of those 50% who got their delivery on time, then this path will cost us only 100,000. For the second contractor, in case we're unlucky and we're part of those 20% who had experienced delay of 1 month on average, then this path will cost us 170,000. That's 150,000 for the machine plus 20,000 for 1 month delay. But if we're lucky and we're part of those 80% who got their delivery on time, then this path would cost 150,000. Now we have just calculated the paths values for these four paths values. Now we need to know for each contractor how much would they cost, taken into consideration both ways, both paths. So, of course, for the first contractor is 50% probability for this first path. So 50% times minus 140,000 plus 50% times these 100,000. So here the first contractor would cost us, taking both paths into consideration, would cost around 120,000. Okay. And for the second contractor is 20% the probability of this path of 170,000 plus 80% the chance for this path of 150,000. So we're talking about 154,000. So based on this decision tree analysis, seems like going with the low bidder is the best option, take into consideration all paths. Okay, so this is a very simple way of describing or understanding the decision tree analysis. Okay, of the risks or the potential risks on a project. Okay. Now, once we have completed the qualitative analysis and we have prioritized our risks, then those prioritized risks, usually those risks with the score that is higher than the threshold, those risks will be taken to a more advanced analysis called quantitative risk analysis. There are a few techniques which we will see in here, such as the expected monetary value, the EMV. Okay, so in these expected monetary value, here we will try to calculate how much money we need to add as a contingency reserve for the threats. Okay, let's take an example. Here we have four risks. Okay, risk A, risk B, risk C, and risk D. Risk A has got a probability of 50% and a potential impact of minus 20,000. Now, since this is minus, then this is a threat. So the expected monetary value of this risk A is 50% times minus 20,000, that's minus 10,000. We have another risk called risk B. We have, evaluated its probability of occurrence of 20%, and it might have a negative potential impact of 5,000, so minus 5,000. Therefore, the expected monetary value of this risk is minus 1,000.
Risk C is actually quite probable of happening, 80% probability, and some really big major impact of minus 12,000. So it's a threat. So here the expected monetary value of this risk so far is minus 9,600. There is a fourth risk, which is risk D, well, it's not very probable. It's like 10% probability of happening, but the impact is quite big if it happens. That's plus 16,000. So here we're talking about an opportunity. So here we have an expected monetary value of plus 1,600. Now, if we sum up all these expected monetary values, so minus 10,000 plus minus 1,000 plus minus 9,600 plus 1,600, that gives us a negative risk exposure. So here the risk exposure is negative of minus 19,000. Okay. Therefore, since the risk exposure is negative, then we need to put in the contingency reserve 19,000. Okay. Now, you calculate this or you prepare this during your planning. Okay. However, during your project execution, you definitely will have some new risks. Some of the probability of some of these risks might change. It might go up or lower. The same with the potential impact. That's why I told you guys, following up with your risks is something you might want to do daily. If not daily, then at least once in a week, because risks, sometimes they often change probability of occurrence or potential impact, and also pay particular attention to volatile events. Okay, that's why we studied volatility earlier, because volatile events actually they're very unpredictable, and they could change probability so often. Okay, so that's why we studied volatility earlier. Okay, that's definitely something to pay attention to. Okay, um, all right. Okay. Um, and if your identified risks probabilities or potential impacts go higher, that means your risk exposure will go higher, and therefore you will need to update your contingency reserve. And often you, as a project manager, you will need to raise a change request in order to update your contingency reserve. In your RMP exam, you will have several questions about this with different scenarios of probability going higher, potential impact going higher. Then you will need to understand that your risk exposure has changed, and therefore you need to adjust your contingency reserve, and you need to create change request. Because let me tell you something important, guys. The questions in the RMP exam are not only about risks. I mean, all of the situations are about risks, okay, and sometimes issues, but also PMI is testing whether you understand how is that related to, for example, some conflicting situations that could create a risk, some new laws, which might also be a source of risk. Sometimes also PMI would test you on change management, etc., etc. So all of that actually is part of our full RMP course. Okay. Let's take a second example of an advanced quantitative analysis. So here we've just changed, we have the same risks, same probability, same impacts, but the risks with negative impacts have become risks with positive impact, potential positive impact, and the last one, which was an opportunity, has become a risk. Sorry, a negative risk, a threat. So yeah. So actually, the expected monetary value of risk A is no more minus 10,000; it's become plus 10,000. This is a second example, not related to the first one. The expected monetary value of risk B is plus 1,000. The expected monetary value of risk C is plus 9,600, and the expected monetary value of risk D is minus 1,600. So here, actually, we have a positive risk exposure, because we're summing up the expected monetary values of all these four risks. 10,000 9,000 plus 1,000 plus 9,600 minus 1,600, that's plus 19,000. So since we have a positive risk exposure, then we don't need to put anything in contingency reserve, okay? Because we have a positive risk exposure. We put money in contingency only when we have a negative risk exposure, okay? So this is an advanced way of analyzing risks. Okay. There is another technique called Monte Carlo analysis. This is usually a computer or a software-based technique, which is, based on the computed data. It is actually evaluating, and actually and making forecasts on the risks, potential, outcomes, impacts, probability of happening, etc. Okay, so this is the Monte Carlo analysis. Of course, in the RMP in the full RMP course, we will have more, analysis of this technique. Let's have a few questions. Ben is the project manager of the new construction project in his organization. He is currently performing the quantitative risk analysis process. He is using a software where the project schedule is computed many times with input values chosen at random for each iteration to create a probability distribution from the iterations. So here actually we're having the definition of the Monte Carlo analysis. So exactly, it's a software base where the schedule, for example, in here is computed many times, is calculated many times through various input values chosen at random, and therefore he should be able to create a probability distribution from the iterations. Now, what technique is been using? Definitely, it's not a bubble chart, not a sensitivity analysis, and not a decision tree analysis. It's actually a Monte Carlo analysis. Okay, since it is using a software and it is a computer based. Okay. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. This is quite an easy one. A project manager is managing a biodegradable packaging project. One of the team members informs the project manager that she identified a risk. Now, when we say a risk, we don't know yet if it's positive or negative. So let's continue reading. The printing machine may need maintenance before the end of the project. The project manager estimates the risk's probability of occurrence as 10% and its cost as 5,000. What's the risk's expected monetary value here? Now, are we talking about a positive risk or a negative risk? Now, definitely, since this is going to cost maintenance, then we're talking about the negative risk. Now, negative risk, so that's like minus 5,000, 10% probability, then that's minus 500. So the right answer is B, minus 500. What's a risk burn down chart? A risk burn down chart is actually following up or is helpful to follow up with the risks from the start or the beginning of the project until the end of the project. Okay. So let's suppose here we have a project where we started with 5 identified risks. We have here a risk, a major big risk in blue, where we fear not to be able to obtain visas for our staff, which we need to or whom we need to send on a trip, to learn about some new technique. So actually, this is a major risk. We have a second risk, a small one actually, of not being able to find a database architect. There is a third risk, which is quite small, which is to have delays of the server's delivery. Then there is a one major risk, uh, of the client changing their requirements, because actually they often do that. and there is one minor or medium risk, which is not to be able to find expert developers. So the risk burn down chart, it serves, or with the risk burn down chart, we're actually following up on these risks day to day, sometimes weekly, measuring the probability and the changes in the probability, and the same with the impact, which means we're following up, with the risk score, and we can see from 1 month to another that huge risk of not being able to obtain the visa is actually shrinking, downgrading. So it's not that severe anymore. We can see that, okay, in here. The same with the availability of database architect. So we kind of managed to find a database architect. But the small risk of, not being able to deliver servers on time actually is increasing from 1 month to another. So we kind of moving towards certainty of not being able to deliver on time. Okay, all right. And then this risk of having the requirements changing. Actually, now the customer, they're becoming clearer about their needs, and actually we kind of now understand better the situation. And the same goes with the other risk of, not finding an expert developer. However, in the middle of the project, a new risk appeared, which is not or having shortages, in the funds, and it started as a very small risk, but the further we went in the project, the bigger it became. Okay, so this is the risk burn down chart. It tracks the risks based on data you feed the tool with. Okay, so that's a risk burn down chart. Let's have a couple of questions before we take a break. While performing a qualitative project risk analysis process, the project manager finds that the product is missing the definition of done. What type of risk is this? Commercial risk, external risk, management risk, or technical risk? Now, since we're talking about definition of done, that's definitely not commercial, not external, and not management. Definitely, it's technical risk. What is meant by cost risk? Is it the cost of all the identified risks if they happen? Does it mean there is a risk that the project cost could go higher than planned? Does it mean there are risks that will cost the project more money? Or is it the cost of contingency reserve assigned for residual risks? Now, of course, when we talk in English language, a cost risk, that means there is a risk that the project cost could go higher. Okay, so that's what we mean by a cost risk. Okay, all right. All right, let's have one more question here. Okay, during the risk identification phase, Sonam and her team identified more than 100 risks. She believes that quantitatively evaluating each of these risks will take a lot of time, while not all of the identified risks are important enough to justify such a measure. Instead, what should her next step be? Okay, identifying risk triggers, then quantitatively analyzing only risks with no found triggers, using qualitative risk analysis to prioritize risks for further quantitative risk analysis, qualitatively assessing the probability of each risk, then analyzing only those with high probability, or assessing the potential impact of each risk qualitatively, then analyzing only risks with high impact. Now, I think the answer is quite easy. She's got more than 100 risks. What she needs to do, Sonam, is first of all
qualitatively analyze the risks, find out the probability, impact, and the score of the risk, then go with further quantitative analysis with those prioritized risks. Okay, so definitely it's not A. Like, A is a bad answer because she cannot quantitatively analyze risks with no found triggers. If no found triggers, then that's not a risk. And for C and D, she cannot quantitatively analyze risks with high probability only or risks with high impact only. She actually needs to do what I just mentioned, which is described in answer B. Okay. All right. Good. So I suggest guys here to take a 10-minute break, and then we will continue with the risk responses and some more questions and answers and some more techniques. Okay. So let's take a 10-minute break, then we will continue. Okay, guys, so let's continue actually with now with how to respond to risks. So as I said, these actually, part this content is taken from our PMP training. Remember that, the RMP course is 30 hours to 40 hours actually of training, okay? So please remember that. Now let's go to planning for risk responses. Now, how would you plan for the risk responses? What's risk tolerance and what's risk appetite? Of course, in risk management and as part of the risk management plan, you definitely need to define what's the tolerance level. Okay, uh, tolerance level is the level which right above it you need to take action towards the risk. Now, when we say risk appetite, generally, we mean like that's the limit of what is inconsequential. Like, that's what you expect actually as risks, and those are very acceptable levels. When a risk is inconsequential, you definitely don't want to implement any action plans because they will just consume resources, um, and they are not, that's not necessary. Okay, so that's called, an inconsequential, or the exposure level is inconsequential. So if any efforts to reduce the exposure, that's considered waste of the company resources. For the risk tolerance levels, that's where the exposure level is acceptable. Actually, we don't need to take really any action to reduce the potential, um, the probability, or the impact of the risk. And if an action must be taken, then it must be justified, okay, through a cost benefit calculation, okay. However, if any risks score exceeds the tolerance level, then that means the exposure level is unacceptable, and there must be an immediate mitigation, okay, and a mandatory action to reduce the exposure level to acceptable levels. Okay, so this is what is risk tolerance and risk appetite. How to respond to risks and when to respond to risks. Usually, that's related or defined by the risk appetite. Okay, and to be honest, guys, if I want to be a little bit out of the topic, which is, and this is something you will not see in your RMP exam. Um, Sometimes treating risks depends on the culture of the of where the project is being managed. So I've worked in cultures where people are very risk averse. They're not risk tolerant at all. They don't accept risky projects, risky situations. Uh, so they try to have projects with almost zero risks. They try to, have everything calculated, where thought of. And I've worked in cultures, where people are fine, with, launching an investment or a project in a risky area. Okay, so there are three types of risk appetites: risk to be risk averse, not to want to have any risks, try to avoid them as much as possible, or to be risk neutral, which is, depending on the situation, or to be a risk taker, which is accepting a project or an investment, even if it's associated with high risks. Okay. Now, what's the difference between active risk acceptance and passive risk acceptance? Active let's start with passive risk acceptance. Passive risk acceptance, that's acknowledging that there are risks, but you're not planning any actions, you're not taking any action. Just periodically, you examine the threat or the opportunity to make sure that it has not changed considerably. Okay, so that's a passive acceptance. That's not taking action, just watching, monitoring the risk. Active acceptance is the opposite. It's actually preparing a response plan, and reserve the necessary time and resources for it in order to deal with the threat or the opportunity if they occur. Okay, such as setting aside a contingency reserve. Okay, so in the RMP certification, you will have several questions and several scenarios about passive acceptance and mainly active acceptance. Okay, now when we're talking about threats, now how can we handle a threat? How can we respond to a threat? What are the threat response strategies? Okay, now the threat response strategies, we have defined five response strategies for a threat and the same for opportunities. Now, if we decide to do nothing, just monitor the threat, then that's just accept. However, if we decide to take action in order to reduce the probability of the threat or the potential impact, then that's called mitigation. And in the RNP exam, actually, we'll have many, many, many situations about mitigation or that depict mitigation. Let's take an example. Now, let's suppose, we heard in the weather forecast that there might be a storm, a destructive storm that is approaching our location. It might arrive in 1 or 2 days. Okay, so outside of our company premises, we have, let's say, many machines operating outdoors. Now we've heard about this coming storm. Now we have two options: either do nothing or simply assess the probability and impact of the storm. If the risk score exceeds um, the threshold, then we might decide to build a huge and large garage um, to store the machines. Of course, the garage, can be, let's say, done in 1 day, for example, if we use those prefabricated materials. However, it will cost us around 30,000. Now, again, we go back to the same usual question, which is it worth spending those 30,000? Even though the weather forecast, they say that there is an 80% probability that it would reach our location. It's not 100%, it's not confirmed, so should we do it, should we not? So actually, if we decide to take the action and build that garage, that means we have taken action to mitigate the potential impact. Okay? In case we're talking about reducing probability, we will see a few examples later with the different questions. Um, Another response strategy could be to transfer a risk, such as buying an insurance. Okay, and that's what we usually do, with our cars. Why do we have car insurance? We have a car insurance because in case something happens, like a risk materializes, at least somebody will take responsibility, for damages and compensation, etc. So that's why we buy an insurance. That's to transfer a risk. Okay, so that's called a transferable risk, which is another risk type which we haven't seen in the course, but actually is mentioned in our tips and tricks for the PMP exam. Another response strategy is to avoid risks, which is, to leave the situation, to avoid the situation where the risk is coming from. And we will see a few examples later in the questions at the end of this session. Or in case a threat, exceeds your power, your level of authority as a project manager or as a team, then you escalate it to the project sponsor or the steering committee. But remember, in case you decide to escalate the risk, there is nothing more you can do. That's it. You have done your job, and that's it for you. No further action is required. So if you decide to escalate the risk, no further action is required from your side. Okay?
As for the opportunities, we also have 5 response strategies. So you could accept to do nothing, just watch the opportunity, monitor it, or you could try to enhance it. Like, for example, taking some actions to increase its probability of occurrence or its potential impact. For example, if you hear that the government is offering financial advantages um, to companies uh, which are operating in rural areas. So you might want to take an advantage of that and, for example, operate in a few rural areas in order to, enhance the probability, enhance the impact, actually, increase the impact. Instead of getting just one financial advantage, you can take like 3 or 4 in case you operate in more rural areas. Okay. And you could choose to share an opportunity with a partnering company or partnering project, okay? Such as, for example, your company provides services, and you've heard about a big deal or a big bid, actually bid in a neighboring country. You want to participate in that bid, but actually the laws there are very strict, and you need to have a local partner in order to participate in a bid. So what you do is you partner with a local company in order to participate in that bid because you're kind of sure that you will win that bid, for example. Or you can simply exploit the opportunity by taking an action in order to take advantage of the opportunity. Okay. Or in case the opportunity is out of your scope, for example, if it's not related to your project, then you can simply let the sponsor, the steering committee know by escalating it to them, and no further action is required from your side. Okay. So those are the 5 response strategies for a threat and the 5 response strategies for an opportunity. Now, remember in your RMP exam, you will have many, many situations depicting uh, these 10 different scenarios, and you need to understand, very well what each scenario is actually depicting. Okay, let's have a few questions. A project manager created a contingency plan associated with the risk. The risk was realized, but the client insists on using a new workaround instead. The requested workaround will introduce delays and require additional budget. What should the project manager do? Request to use the management reserve to keep the schedule, mitigate risks associated with the workaround to avoid delays, proceed with the approved risk response plan, or discuss the options with the client as part of the change control process. Now, definitely we cannot proceed with the approved risk response plan because the client is insisting on using a new workaround. However, this new workaround might cause delays and additional budget. Therefore, we need to discuss with the client about these potential delays and additional budget as part of the change control process, which means we will proceed with the workaround that the client proposed or insisted on, but we definitely need to discuss with them, how to handle these delays and additional budget or additional cost as part of the change management process. Okay. Okay. Good. We will not use the management reserve um, because actually this is known risk. Okay, and we know it's known because we talked about the contingency plan, which is a known risk. Okay. All right. And answer B is wrong because um, we don't want just to avoid delays. We have a problem with delays and cost, both. So we definitely will need to raise a change request to manage and handle these delays and additional cost. Project manager is leading a project that is vital to their organization and the local environment and energy authority. During a team meeting to discuss project risks, the team raised a high risk that an important senior manager is not currently involved with the project. What should the project manager do to mitigate this risk? Implement regular status reporting,
escalate this risk to senior management, develop a highly detailed project management plan, or invite the senior manager to daily project meetings. Now, answer D is not possible because the senior manager is not involved at all. Implementing regular status meeting reporting does not solve it. Okay, and developing a detailed project plan definitely has got nothing to do with it. So, since this is a senior manager, they're not involved. Then what we need to do is to involve the management. Okay. So in this scenario, in this situation, you need to have some, involvement from management to bring the senior manager back to the project. Along with developing a contingency plan for possible issues, the project manager might also need to create a workaround to deal with when they occur. Identified and passively accepted risks, unidentified and passively accepted risks, identified and actively accepted risks, or unidentified and passively accepted risks. Now, a contingency plan for possible issues, but a workaround. This is for unknown unknowns, the unidentified risks, and therefore we need to have a management reserve here. The management reserve here, we keep it on a side to deal with unidentified risks, but which are also passively accepted because we don't know them yet, so we cannot be, they cannot be actively accepted, so they are passively accepted. Moving the process of during the process of hiring an electrical engineer, a project manager only conducted one behavioral interview. Later on, they discovered that the candidate's technical skills do not meet the job requirements. Therefore, they decided that henceforth they will support the recruitment process with a technical test and an additional technical interview. What risk response strategy did the project manager apply? Mitigate, accept, transfer, or avoid? Now, what the project manager did here is they figured that their current hiring process is not effective, so they enhanced that process with a few more steps. So actually, here the project manager did not avoid. They did not like decide to stop doing the recruiting by themselves. No, they don't do that. They did not transfer this. They did not ask somebody else to do the hiring instead of them. And they did not accept. They don't say, okay, you know what, it's fine. Maybe this time I made a mistake, but maybe next time it will be fine. But I will keep the process. Actually, that's not what they said. Actually, what they did, and they improved the process. So they took steps in order to minimize the probability of doing the same mistake again. And therefore, that's called mitigating. Okay, so what the project manager did here is mitigate. Okay, during a planning session, a project management team determined that they need to purchase new equipment in November. The project manager thought it would be a good idea to take advantage of Black Friday's discounts since it takes place in the last week of November. How should the project team deal with this opportunity? Exploit, share, enhance, accept. Now, if they decided to buy the machine or the equipment, in the last week of November, that's not sharing, and that's not enhancing. Enhancing, that's like trying to get Black Friday earlier in November. Okay. Uh, you know, that's not just sitting and watching. That's actually exploiting. So the right answer here is exploit. Okay. All right. Now we saw earlier the risk register. So let's go back actually to the risk register. And here you can see that once we have high risk, then we definitely need to, create a response plan. So here, for example, for this risk technical one, we decide to mitigate and we describe how the mitigation will be like contract with a new supplier within 30 days, for example. Risk owner, this is who will follow with the action implementation, okay? The implementation of the action plan, and then the status, like what's the status? Is it current? Is it obsolete? Is it residual? Okay, etc. So you as a project manager, you need to make sure that the risk owner is actually following with the risk implementation plan. And in the RMP certification, there are many questions about who is being a risk owner, what should the risk owner do, etc. So that's an important part of the RMP certification. Okay. Okay, so this is the risk register. Okay. All right. I'm skipping this question. I don't like it. Let's have a few questions. A project manager is leading a project that is in an advanced stage. All high-level risks identified in the risk management plan have been resolved or are no longer a risk for the project. Only low-level risks remain. What should the project manager do now? Reduce the priority of project risks as all remaining risks are low level. Notify stakeholders that all high level risks have been resolved. Re-evaluate identified risks and update the risk register, or reclassify the low level risks as high level risks? This is a good question actually, because here all the high level risks have been resolved or are no longer valid. So now what's next? Definitely is to go back to the remaining risks and re-evaluate them. Definitely is answer C. Okay. Once you have dealt with your high level risks, you need to go back to your risk register, even though I advised you earlier not just to not to forget about them, actually to keep monitoring them. But here you don't want to reduce their priority, okay, and make them like low level. It's not as answer B is actually is not an action. Actually, it's not an effective action. And answer D, reclassify all of them as high level. That's wrong. You need to re-evaluate them, okay, and make sure that you recalculate, re-evaluate their probability and impact and score, and then be able to prioritize those ones who have become high, okay. During the execution phase of a project team identifies a previously unforeseen risk that could delay the project for several months. What should the project manager do first? Update the risk register, perform qualitative risk analysis, update the project sponsors, or plan for additional budget. Now, definitely not plan for additional budget. That's not the first thing to do. But since here there is a new risk identified. It was previously unforeseen. And the question is asking you what to do first. Then definitely what to do first is to update the risk register, okay? To log it into the risk register. That's the first thing. And then perform qualitative risk analysis, okay? And then if it turns to be a high risk, then inform your project stakeholders and make sure that you prepare an action plan, okay? So in case you, in the exam of the RMP certification, you have questions that ask you what to do first, always choose the one that comes first in time or first in the process. Okay. What's the difference between a corrective action and a preventive action? Okay, so we talked about this earlier. We said that preventive action, that's before the risk occurs. Usually it starts with assessing the risk, and this is the proactive approach. A corrective action, that happens after a problem occurs. We usually start with identifying the root cause of the problem, and it's a reactive approach. Okay. Let's have a question. A project manager canceled a lessons learned review meeting due to time constraints. The potential consequences of this decision might implicate issues faced through the project could reoccur due to the missed opportunity to identify preventive actions. Project management will get more difficult. Project cost will be greater. The project may not be accepted by the project management office PMO. Now, definitely canceling lessons learned meeting is not good at all. Okay. However, canceling it does not mean that the project will be more difficult or the project cost will be higher, actually, or the project will not be accepted by PMO. Canceling a lessons learned meeting in a current project, that means we might miss the opportunity to identify potential risks in the next projects because we don't have uh, the lessons learned from the previous project, and we don't know how the issues were resolved or what could be an issue. Okay, so the answer is A. While monitoring the performance of a construction project, the project manager notices that the project is likely to drift away from the planned schedule. Therefore, they implement what in order to ensure that the project is fully aligned with the agreed upon project baselines, like preventive actions, corrective actions, change requests, or defective pairs. Okay. Now here we have risks because it says likely to drift away. So maybe, potentially, might drift away. Okay. So therefore, we need to implement some preventive actions because if you're talking about the risk, then we're talking about preventive actions to ensure that the project is fully aligned with agreed upon baselines. Okay. Now, what's the difference between a risk audit and a risk review? Okay. Whenever we use the term audit, so in risk management, risk audit means examining the effectiveness of the risk management process, okay, and whether the steps are being followed, okay, whether the right procedures or right steps are being followed. However, a risk review, that means examining the effectiveness of the response plan, okay, making sure that a response plan is successful. So that's the difference between a risk audit and a risk review. Let's have a question about this. No, I'm skipping this one. A project manager was notified by management that they're sending a team of experts to conduct a risk audit. Even though the project manager had already completed a risk review process without finding any shortcomings, the management insisted on proceeding with the risk audit. Which of the following statements are true about risk audits and risk reviews? So here, select two answers. A risk audit is conducted to examine the risk response plan. Definitely not. That's a risk review. So answer A is wrong. A risk review is conducted to examine the risk response plan. Yes. A risk audit is conducted to investigate whether the risk response plan is being followed. That's correct because we said that the risk audit is about checking if the right procedures, the right steps are being applied. A risk review is conducted to investigate whether the risk response plan is being followed, and actually, not. That's not it. Okay, so the right answers are B and C. This is an example of an issue log. That's when a risk becomes an issue. When a negative risk happens, it becomes an issue. So this is an example of an issue log. So here we have the description of the issue, who reported the issue, when did they report the issue, who is assigned to resolving the issue, priority of the issue, status, and any comments, on the issue. Okay, so that's an example of an issue log. Remember, guys, this is just a summary session. Actually, the full RMP course is like 30 hours to 40 hours. With us, it's 30 hours plus 10 additional hours optional. So please, you will learn a lot in the RMP course. A project manager, I like this one. I like this question actually. A project manager is in charge of New York's new bridge construction project. They were informed by one of the subject matter experts that next July, all of the bridge construction work will need to stop, taking into consideration the past history of river flooding due to the hurricane season. Thus, they agree with the expert and arrange to stop the work during that month. This decision is considered as what? Acceptance, transfer, mitigation, or avoidance. Now, the expert advised the project manager to stop the work in July due to floods or hurricane season and potential floods. So the project manager agreed to that. Okay, that's not acceptance because acceptance means the project manager um, uh, decided to continue the work and not take any action. That's not the case. That's not transfer. So the project manager did not ask another company to carry out the work. No, that's not transfer. Definitely not. And that's not. mitigation, because mitigation is like the project manager decide to continue the work, but actually take some precautions, like for example, having some bags full of sand around the construction site, etc., to prevent the flooding from, arriving to the site location. That did not happen. So therefore, the right answer here is avoidance. Since the project manager decided actually not to continue the work during July, that means they decide to avoid the risk. Okay. All right. A technology project has members of a project team from multiple countries. The stakeholders have stated that this arrangement will keep the project within budget. Maybe guys, you're wondering why so many questions actually, because in our training we usually apply the 3 by 1 technique, which means you have the course, and also you have the practice questions to explain to you the mindset of PMI, and then you have the tips and tricks at the end. Okay, in this session, we will not see the tips and tricks because those are reserved for PMP participants, even though they are shared on YouTube in another video. But actually, in our PMP course, we have so many questions. So, our participants could really understand the techniques, deep, like further understand the techniques, and also be able to understand PMI's mindset, which is so important to be able to answer correctly in the exam. That's why we add so many questions in our PMP course, for example. Okay, and the same for the RMP. A technology project has members of a has team members from multiple countries. The stakeholders have stated that this arrangement will keep the project within budget. However, the project manager believes that the stakeholders have not accounted for issues that might arise that could affect the success of the project. What should the project manager do to record this concern? Document the risks in the risk register, revise the stakeholder engagement plan, capture the information, the issue log, or update the resource management plan. Now, I don't think answers B and D are helpful. So actually, since here they haven't identified risks about how this could affect the project, having team from multiple countries. So definitely we need to document the risks in the risk register. That's not about a problem with the engagement plan of the stakeholders, and it's not a problem with resource management. Okay, and this is not an issue because it did not happen yet. Okay, because it says might arise. Might arise here. We're talking about risks. Okay. During project execution, the project manager notices that the work performance reports have deteriorated drastically in less than 2 weeks. The project team in country A is complaining about delays resulting from holidays occurring in country B that have impacted their project team. How should the project manager handle this situation? Implement crashing to compress the schedule and improve the schedule performance index. Implement fast tracking to compress the schedule and improve the SPI. Perform conflict management using the project's resource management plan, or review the risk management plan to evaluate the probability and impact of these delays. Okay, so definitely the right answer is the last one, because here we need to evaluate the probability and impact of these delays on the project. Okay, it's not about compressing or fast tracking or crashing, neither using the resource management plan, okay, to perform conflict management. Okay, I think yeah, we're just done with this chapter for risk management. Okay, so if you guys, if you want, we can have some, you can see, also have a look at the 10 test questions. Usually, the chapter risk management in our PMP course, it takes an entire session. Okay, like at least 3 hours. So, I try to be brief. Okay, I've skipped some parts, just small parts. I've skipped the tips and tricks. You can find it in a separate video in our YouTube channel. Let's have some 10 test questions and then I'll let you go, guys. Okay. All right. So let's start with question one. A labor union contract negotiation is delaying the completion of a project to build a new manufacturing plant. Because the labor contract was due for renewal this year, the project manager documented the negotiation process as a risk to the project. The project was about to start the first phase of equipment installation at the plant when the negotiation began. How should the project manager address the situation? Meet with the project team to determine options for risk mitigation, log the issue and follow the planned actions in the risk response plan, acquire contract resources and submit a change request for the cost impact, or escalate the issue to the steering committee to ask for mitigation support. Okay. Now, of course, since this was identified as a risk, therefore, the right answer is this has become an issue now, and we need definitely to follow the planned actions and the risk response plan. Okay. Um, we don't need to escalate it. And we don't want to, answer it. It's not the right one because we have already identified this. Okay. Um, and therefore, the right answer is B. An agile team, and by the way, guys, risks happen in both waterfall, agile, and also even in hybrid projects. So uh, not just in waterfall. Okay, and that's something I talked about before, and I told you guys that many people practicing agile or working with agile approaches, they forget often to manage risks, handle risks, identify risks, evaluate risks, etc. Okay. And many thought that applying risk management the way it should be applied, that actually happens um, only in waterfall, but actually dealing with the risks happens both in agile and waterfall. And you will see in your RMP exam that actually it describes risks in both agile, waterfall, and even in hybrid. An agile team is in the early phases of development cycle for a project. However, they've already begun to deliver functionality to the customer. The team has identified risks to the project and are working on developing the mitigation strategy. What should the project manager do next? Incorporate and prioritize the risks in the risk register according to the impact, escalate the risk to the project sponsor and steering committee, implement the risk mitigation strategy according to the highest impact, or determine if any of the new risks has got any um, financial impact. Okay. So the right answer, of course, is to incorporate and prioritize the risks in the risk register according to the impact. Okay, because here the team, they have identified risks and are working on developing the mitigation strategy. So next is incorporate them into the risk register and prioritize them after the qualitative analysis. Okay, no need to escalate. We try to avoid escalation. Okay, we don't implement according to the highest impact, and we don't. Answer D is not about determining the financial impact. During the risk management planning process for a software development project, a project team identifies a high risk item related to the integration of a third party tool into the system. The team has identified a contingency plan, but it is expensive and may impact the project budget. What should the project manager do next? Implement the contingency plan immediately to avoid any potential risks. Evaluate the cost benefit analysis of the contingency plan before implementing it. Wait and see if the risk materializes before taking any action. This is definitely not. Answer C, definitely not. Ignore the high risk item. No, we don't pick any answers that start with ignore. We don't wait and see if the risk materializes. And we don't implement the contingency plan because actually it's ineffective. Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Um, so here what we need to do is to evaluate the cost benefit analysis of the contingency plan before implementing it, since it is expensive. It's gonna be expensive. Okay, so we don't implement it immediately because it's expensive, but we need to make a cost benefit analysis before implementing it. A risk was identified at the beginning of an agile project and a mitigation plan was established. The risk event occurs, but the impact is much higher than anticipated, and the originally planned response will be ineffective. The project team developed a more effective response, but it is drastically different from the original mitigation plan and must be implemented as soon as possible. What should the project manager do? Implement only the initial response as outlined in the risk management plan? I don't think so because it's ineffective. Update the risk management plan and implement the newly created response. Okay. Defer risk response until the next progress meeting to inform stakeholders. That will be too late, actually. Implement a contingency response and inform the stakeholders afterward. No, not really. So the right answer is answer B, which is update the risk management plan with a new response plan. Okay. And implement the newly created response plan. An organization is embarking on the deployment of a new digital solution that will revolutionize purchasing services. The project manager has created all the necessary plans and activities to ensure a successful integration and solution launch. There is a risk of a partner system being unavailable, which could impact the project negatively. What key activity is needed to ensure the project success? Now, first of all, we need to be sure that here it says risk of a partner system being unavailable. It didn't say it is unavailable. It might be unavailable. Okay, it's a risk. It could impact. Okay, so communicate to the project stakeholders that full integration may not be possible and that the project will potentially be delayed as a result. That's ineffective solution. We don't select it. Eliminate the risk by mandating the partner to change the system settings to facilitate an easier integration with a new solution. We don't select answer B because it includes a word such as mandating, imposing, forcing. We avoid answers with such keywords, okay? Continuously monitor the risk of the partner system unavailability and put the proper solution plans in place in case the risk materializes into an actual one. I like this one, actually, it's good. Mitigate the risk by developing alternative plans to make the solution ready and available without full integration capability. I like the answer C better, actually. Okay. Question 6. In a hybrid project, a customer decided on a major change for the project design. This change was approved and the impact on schedule and budget is known. The software team leader, who is supposed to develop the software, refuses to commit to delivery dates, claiming that they work using an agile approach and cannot commit to a final delivery date. The hardware team depends on this software to develop their part of the product. What should the project manager do? Add this risk to the risk register and monitor it according to the risk management plan. Escalate this to higher management and ask for help to resolve the issue. I don't think so. Impose the I don't think impose. See, another response that starts with impose, force, mandate. No, we don't say like that. Okay. Ask the software team leader to use the predictive approach and commit. No, because actually they're using agile, so we don't roll back to predictive. So actually, the right answer is A. Okay, which is add this risk the risk register and monitor it according to the risk management plan, because actually we apply the risk management plan on agile and waterfall equally. Okay. A project manager and the project team identified risks, performed a qualitative risk analysis, and prepared a risk response plan. However, delays in the response to the risk events are affecting the project schedule. How would assigning risk owners to the risk responses help avoid these delays? Risk owners work with the project sponsor to ensure the risk response plan will be effective. Nope. Risk owners identify likely constraints and assumptions before the risk event occurs. Not really. The risk owners are responsible for implementing the appropriate risk response strategy. Yes. The risk report assigns management of delays in the project schedule to the appropriate risk owner. Not really, no. The right answer is C, actually, okay? Because risk owners actually are the ones watching after the implementation of the selected risk response strategy. In a critical project to the organization, one of the contractors complains that approvals are lengthy and difficult to handle. The contractor mentioned this as it may affect the project schedule. What should the project manager do next? Hire additional resources for the team to mitigate the risk? Not really. To be honest, not, because PMI's mindset refuses to hire external resources. We should be able to solve it on our own. And it's really is critical to have somebody external because we don't have the resources in-house. So I think we will exclude answer A. Add this risk to the risk register to be monitored and reviewed. Escalate this risk to upper management as critical for timely delivery. I don't think so. Discuss this with the team to find options to mitigate the risk. And the right answer, of course, is this one, is a better one, okay? Uh, definitely to discuss it with the team and find options to mitigate the risk. Okay. Some of you might wonder why not add it to the risk register to be monitored and reviewed, because that's not an effective action. If the question asks what to do first, is to add it to the risk register. But what made answer be negative is just to be monitored and reviewed. No, actually, we need to discuss options to mitigate the risk. Okay. During the implementation of a project, the project team discovered a new opportunity. After an internal review, the team agreed that the opportunity is outside of the project scope. The project manager decided to update the risk register and escalate the opportunity to a higher level. What should the project manager do next with this opportunity? Share this opportunity with another project, establish a contingency reserve to support the opportunity, further monitor the opportunity, or no more action is required. So, as I told you earlier, guys, if you figure out or find out that a threat or an opportunity are actually outside of your scope of work, outside of your level of authority, then you can escalate the risk or the opportunity to the management or to the senior, the sponsor, the steering committee, and nothing else you should do. Okay, that's it. So that's why the right answer here is no more action is required. And the last question for this session, a project manager is assigned to a project that is in development. As the project manager reviews the project progress, they find a few tasks that are behind schedule. After investigating the project manager discovers that a few team members were pulled to work on other assignments, which impacted their ability to focus on the project manager's work. Which two actions can the project manager take to bring the team back on track? Choose two answers. Establish daily stand-ups to review the project progress and track the completion of deliverables. Allow the team members to catch up at their own pace. I don't think so. Alert the business stakeholders immediately of schedule delay is ineffective. I don't think so. Discuss the risk of project delay and work priorities with the respective functional managers. I think yes, because the resources were pulled from the project like suddenly, which means the project manager is not in a projectized organization. Because in a projectized organization, they should be in control of their resources. Since they were not in control of their resources, that means the functional manager is the one deciding. Work with the team to identify options to accelerate project delivery. Actually, the right two answers are D and E, okay? Which is discuss with the functional manager and also work with the team to identify options to accelerate project delivery. So actually, guys, this is most of the risk management chapter, which we have in our PMP training, because remember, in our PMP training, we have 12 chapters. And actually, throughout the training, there are many, many, many questions related to risk management. Of course, we could not see all of them. In the next and last session of this introduction to RMP, we will have, I think, around 40 or 50 questions, very similar to the questions in the RMP certification. And from those questions, we will learn a lot. So, thank you very much for joining this session, and see you on the next and last session of this series of introduction to the RMP certification. Have a nice evening, guys. Thank you very much. See you soon.